Yep. Are they? Okay. Copy that. Thank you. I'll tell you what, Johnny, let's go ahead and do a full orbit and we'll come right back to this position here. I just want to use this opportunity to kind of get a view on the other side of these trees here. If we could do a tight orbit so we try not to let the building get too much in the way. We'll just want to see the posture of these officers behind them. More objects being thrown at those CHP officers. Good angle. Let's push all the way in there. Look at these people. They're climbing through the bushes to try and crowd the staircase. You see a whole bunch of people on the staircase with umbrellas extended all the way out here. Let's stay tight in there. Impossible to tell. I'm just trying to decipher what the next steps here are. It's impossible to tell whether there's some kind of a dialogue being exchanged here, or what the next move here is for these officers. Trying to figure out what type of tools they can employ here within their rules of engagement to try and figure out how to get to the top of that staircase and move these people out of the way. You can see about 100 people basically on that staircase making their way up the embankment there, and a whole lot of umbrellas now extended in their direction. What are those yellow things? Oh, flashlights. Those are the flashlights. Okay. Sorry, we've got a lot of flashlights. can't help but feel like the more time they spend here, the more opportunity the rest of the protesters inside the encampment are going to have to prepare here. Even though they've been preparing all day for this moment, you just hate to take that advantage of time away from those officers if they can move quickly up that staircase and somehow eradicate this group right here somehow. It's a tricky space to work with. It's a narrow staircase that leads to the quad up top near Royce Hall, and then you've got this whole other group to the right that they still have to deal with, hundreds of people that are climbing through these bushes and making their way up towards that group of officers. That's what I was thinking. That's why I wanted to see the other side of, you know, if they would have come up from different angles simultaneously. Yep. All right, so that skirmish line is intact. Okay. Additional officers being dropped off. This is a separate bus. This is a separate bus of officers now being dropped off, and they're walking the opposite side of Royce Hall. They're going to come around the other side. Okay, a separate group of officers, a whole nother busload of officers has just been dropped off. They're making their way to the east side of Royce Hall. All right, protesters getting ready for a confrontation on the opposite hall as another 50 or so officers make their way along the south side of the hall here towards the quad. Yep. They may. That makes the most sense. Some of them moved over. Yep. All right, show me the big group. Some people in custody under that walkway. All right, let's bring it back over here. That drone there does not look like a police drone. Yep, yep. All right, so that some of these officers have come from that original group. There was another bus that was dropped off here. I estimate maybe, it's hard to tell with that tree there, but at least 50 or 60 officers over here now forming a new skirmish line as they get ready to advance on the opposite side of Royce Hall. You can see students confronting these officers, trying to communicate, perhaps some chanting going on here. What is that they've used to block the staircase? There's a staircase that leads down, and that looks like some dumpsters that they've used to form a blockade. And here they go. They're going to move forward. Is that a different drone or another drone? It's another drone. More CHP moving down to the bottom here. All right, they're starting to scatter out more. This is smart here as they kind of surround this corner of the quad. There's a group right there that's going to move forward against those dumpsters, and then you have about how many over there on the right, all the way to the right? A small little group there, yeah, about another dozen or so that are now just about 30 feet away from the front of the encampment. Again, that's the east side of the encampment. If we move back over to the west side of the encampment, there is more chanting and flashlights in the faces of those CHP officers. Even a laser at one point I saw there pointing at those officers. They're screaming and chanting and refusing to let those officers budge. They haven't pushed too hard yet, but there's a lot of people in their way, and they've got to make their way up a small, narrow staircase to get into the quad here. So it's a tight space that they're working with. We do. Same pilot. And roughly 35, 40 minutes of fuel. Sounds good. All right. This is a larger contingent, perhaps from the original squad there that are moving into the south side of Royce Hall. I think they see the opportunity for somewhat easier access than that other staircase, but it seems like they've almost divided it in half, maybe. Are they? All right. So that front line there, that front line of students appears to be putting their hands up, some of them at least, and just giving up. We'll see if they can advance through those bushes here or maybe tear down that blockade. But it looks like not much resistance from that first group of students. The students are actually removing the blockade and moving the barricade from the stairs. All right, that blockade is completely gone. The barricade is gone. A large group of CHP officers now with the freedom to move down this staircase and start ripping away, I would presume, at that plywood. Look at the dozen, there's a dozen or so CHP officers now closing in on the front of the encampment, and it looks like somebody's about to give the order to go ahead and move in here. I think we're seconds away from seeing some movement here on the east end, on the east side of this encampment, where there is a large plywood, makeshift plywood wall that has been under construction all day. We'll see just how well constructed it was, but I think there's plenty of opportunity here for them to penetrate this wall and make entry into the encampment here. Doesn't seem like much in their way. They're starting to make their way down the staircase. There's another group of officers already at the bottom. Here they come. They're coming down the staircase. Maybe they're looking for some more people who are willing to negotiate here. Look at that. A whole group of students that were blocking the staircase now walking away with their hands up, being led down the back of Royce Hall. Dozens of students now being escorted away from Royce Hall with their hands up, and officers now making their way down the staircase. I think CHP sees an opportunity here to maybe negotiate with some of these people on the leading edge of the encampment. Perhaps. All right, some barricades coming down. They're going to penetrate this wall here pretty quickly, I think. CHP officers looking for any opening to get in there and penetrate that corner of the quad where it is, again, has been heavily fortified throughout the day, and now they are starting to rip away at the barricade that is holding up some of that wood. They have stockpiled tons of wood over the course of the last 24 hours, and you can see that a bulk of the people in this encampment have gravitated to either side of the encampment, where there are now two sets of CHP officers attempting to penetrate the perimeter of this encampment. They've opened this side. This is the walkway that leads to the front of Royce Hall. I think that leads to the front door, if I'm not mistaken. It's a foyer that kind of leads to the front of the building here. It looks like it may be penetrated. There are a whole group of supporters and protesters under that roof there, and you can see umbrellas trying to conceal, or maybe, I don't know what they're doing with those umbrellas, quite frankly. But it's bad luck, right? They're tearing apart at that barricade. Some more pallets being pulled away here. Still, yeah. Yeah, you guys say when? Really difficult to see what's happening in here, quite frankly, but it does look like they're chipping away at whatever barricades are in their way, using multiple entry points to try and break through here. You can see them tearing up umbrellas, tearing up signs, pulling away signs, and they're taking more barricades down. On both the upstairs and at the bottom of those stairs, plywood is now coming apart, and that wall is about to come down. That plywood wall is about to come down, and the end is near for this encampment. It certainly appears as though they are not facing that much resistance, quite frankly. They're working very methodically, but they don't seem to be putting up with much fight. Yeah. Continuing to pull away at that plywood. The wall's coming down piece by piece. Hey, how are you? Okay. Okay, great. So in other words, a self-toss? Copy. Thank you. Thank you, thank you. Standing by. Welcome, everybody. You're watching Eyewitness News. Chris Christie up in Air 7 HD with breaking news over the UCLA campus, where hundreds of CHP officers are now in the process of penetrating this week-long encampment here in front of Royce Hall. This encampment, which has been refortified over the last 24 hours, is now disintegrating at the edges as CHP starts to tear away at the plywood. There are hundreds of people inside this encampment. However, at this point, the resistance has been minimal. They've been faced with lots of flashlights and lasers, some other garbage thrown in their direction, but for the most part, they are managing to take down this barricade and take down the plywood, which has been blocking law enforcement from entering this encampment. This encampment has basically been under protester control completely for the past couple of days. It's an occupied zone in front of Royce Hall that now has a wall built on the east side as well as the west side, and now there are hundreds of CHP officers on both sides of the encampment as they tear away at this side of the encampment wall. We'll go ahead and pan over to the opposite side of Royce Hall, where there are, again, 100 or two more officers still trying to talk some sense maybe into these protesters who are preventing them from making their way up a narrow staircase to get into the quad here. Something is going off on the side. I don't know if it's fireworks or what, but something is going off. What is that? What is that? Is that bottle? Yeah, there's like some bottle rockets going off that are almost blinding up here, and it's coming from the edge there. So somebody's launching bottle rockets in some direction. I can't tell exactly where they're coming from. Anyway, you can see about 100 or so CHP officers on this side. I'm sorry, less lethal rounds being shot into the encampment. There are less lethal rounds being shot into the encampment. These are coming from CHP. These are coming from the CHP side of the wall, and as shots are being fired into the encampment. These are not bullets. These are less lethal rounds that are being shot into the encampment. That might be what was catching the corner of my eye here. Very, very bright, and you can see something being used to launch into this encampment. They have penetrated the corner here, but they have not quite made entry into all of those tents. You can see a lot of people milling about as they were trying to make their way down that staircase right there on the right-hand side of your screen. There were a couple of dozen students blocking their way, as well as a couple of dumpsters blocking the staircase, and at some point, the students ended up putting up their hands and helping in removing the blockade, allowing those officers down the staircase. Now making their way into the encampment, penetrating that plywood wall has proven to be a little bit more difficult, but you could see whatever is being launched into the encampment is producing a haze. It's producing a haze that you can see on the camera lens here. So something has been launched in there. It is creating a haze. We're now peering through the haze to try and get a better look at both sides of Royce Hall, where now hundreds of CHP officers are executing the dispersal order that was given at 6 o'clock on Wednesday evening. There was an unlawful assembly declared at around 6:15. A dispersal order has been repeated over the last 6 to 7 hours, and now finally CHP moving into position to try and penetrate this encampment and as peacefully as possible remove these students and protesters from this illegal, unlawful assembly. We're still looking through some haze here. It's also a combination of some low clouds that are moving through here as well. As we peer through this moisture, you can see they are still working at trying to get through there. I don't see any actual officers in the encampment just yet, but they are chipping away there at the edges of this encampment. There are groups of people under those tents. They have shields, they're wearing helmets. They've been preparing for this moment all day long, ever since the violence broke out on Tuesday night. They've spent the entire day refortifying this encampment and shopping for materials, PPE, goggles, helmets, umbrellas, you name it. We saw groups of fire extinguishers at the ready, just waiting to be put to use here tonight, and even signs pointing protesters in the direction of the various tents. At one point, we saw a tent that literally said, "Protection for tonight," as they were looking for some of the PPE to try and defend against tear gas and stuff like that. But you can see it does look like CHP is slowly and gradually making their way through these tents, through that wall, and finally they will figure out who's going to put up a fight here and who will be placed under arrest. There are dozens of LA County Sheriff's buses at the ready and waiting for processing and booking of however many arrestees they have to deal with at the end of this operation. But they are fully equipped. Law enforcement from the LAPD, the LA County Sheriff's Department, and the California Highway Patrol have been marshaling their forces all day long for the better part of the last 15 hours, getting into position as we've been waiting for this moment where they are finally executing that order to disperse this crowd and take down this encampment, which has just gotten to be too dangerous. We have seen a couple people detained, John, but as you can see now, we see some of this crowd starting to move away from the edge there as there's some smoke grenades going off. Not sure if it's tear gas or if it's just smoke, but we did count at least one or two people being placed in handcuffs when these CHP officers first arrived. Earlier, LAPD tried to make their way into the encampment. They actually were able to make their way up a staircase on the opposite side, and as they had to retreat because they were surrounded by protesters, there was some pushing and shoving, and one of the officers was hurt, minor injuries. He was okay, but they did detain somebody temporarily at that point and eventually let him go. LAPD now holding that skirmish line. Again, that's all happening on the opposite side of the quad here. But now you can see these tents are starting to be moved and taken down as CHP is now within the perimeter of this encampment. John? Yeah, we're talking about at least about 300 by my estimation. We've seen about 5 buses pull in and drop these officers off, maybe even more than 300, but at least 300 by my count here. And you can see that now a little bit more of a line of scrimmage here as you have officers on the right, protesters on the left, and now a bit of a standoff right there at the perimeter. How much of a fight, how stubborn they're going to be is what we're going to find out here, but they are giving them every last opportunity to try and bring this to an end as peacefully as possible with as least amount of force as possible. You see them pulling the protesters. They're going to start doing it one by one and just peeling them off, hoping that they put up very little fight. And I think for the most part we could say that they have not encountered quite the resistance that you would expect, although they clearly are not being welcomed in by this crowd, and so they are in a position where they are using less lethal rounds. You can see objects being thrown in their direction. There are water bottles, there are other objects. It looked at one point like there wasn't a fire extinguisher that was tossed over there, but you can see clearly now about a couple dozen a couple dozen officers on the right there, and several dozen near the top of the staircase that are trying to penetrate the entrance to Royce Hall near the top left-hand portion of your screen there. So there are 2 groups of officers in this shot right here, and you can see a combination of smoke and cloud that is now coming in the way here that we're trying to peer through to try and get a better glimpse. But they are face-to-face with these protesters who are holding up umbrellas to prevent, basically shield themselves from tear gas, essentially. But they're just kind of grasping at those and tearing those umbrellas apart as well. Here's a fire extinguisher being used in the direction of those officers, John. Thank you. Yeah. That's exactly right. I don't know if they're going home exactly, but I think ultimately you're going to have a good portion that do manage to sneak out of here. And most likely you will be left with a core group of holdouts who are going to fight to the bitter end. But I think you're right about that. It's striking to me how methodically they're going about this. You know, there are a number of different tactics that law enforcement could take in a situation like this to break up any kind of a protest or a riot. This is not a riot at this point, but they are facing resistance. In this case, the rules of engagement are clearly such that they are using very kid-glove care on these protesters, despite the fact that they have a lot of obstacles and things being thrown and tossed in their direction. They clearly are, somewhat restrained here in terms of how they go about doing this. They're using the least amount of force as possible, as clearly must have been the directive in terms of making sure that there is minimal injury in this process. And that, I think, really explains why this is happening so slowly and methodically, John. You get the impression, yeah. Yeah, you get the impression there's some kind of dialogue taking place there. Otherwise, they could easily force their way through here. Mind you, we should focus on this group here because there is a large group of well over 100 CHP officers who are being held back. They are not being welcomed up that staircase, a much narrower staircase that is proving to be very difficult for them to plow through. There's a crowd blocking their way, and they really aren't able to make their way up here. I almost wonder if they're going to make their way around, but now we're going to start to see some scuffles taking place at the leading edge of this protest. The holdouts are not going away peacefully, and so they are going to be pulled away. They're going to be peeled off of each other one by one if they continue to resist. So we're seeing some scuffles breaking out between police and protesters who are somewhat prepared, but again, not to the extent that these CHP officers are with their riot gear, John. All right, we are out of fuel. We're going to head back. You got it. Copy, copy. Thank you, thank you. Okay. Nice job, bud. Really? Oh, man, I don't even want to go home. Should I just tell Scott, yeah, take the day? Just. I know you were. Is it socked?